Hello, curious! In 1898, Marie Curie discovered radium and the whole world became obsessed with this new element. It was added to almost everything from toothpaste to chocolate, and in one of its inventions was also fluorescent paint, used in watch factories. And it was put on shields and pointers so that they would glow in the dark. But the young women who took care of it also literally shone after a short time as a result of the constant contact with the radioactive radium. The side effects were even more gruesome as workers' teeth fell out, rotten skin, and mass death occurred. But how is it possible that they were allowed to work under such conditions? And why was it thought that radium healed and not harmful? Who were the so-called Radium Girls whose death saved the lives of thousands of other workers? Stay with us until the very end to discover the shocking story of the women who, although they changed America, were almost forgotten. But before we get into it, don't forget to click on the subscription button, turn on the notifications, and leave a like. Let's get started. In 1917 in the United States, working in a factory that produced fluorescent watches was a dream come true, and they were produced for soldiers fighting in the fronts of the World War I, and their uniqueness was the hidden in fact that they glowed in the dark, and all thanks to the fact that they were covered with paint containing radium, and the newly discovered element that was a real hit at the time, and the largest plant producing glowing timepieces was in the U.S. Radium Corporation in New Jersey, employing thousands of young women who were additionally encouraged to be very good earnings, and every day the workers at all of their positions were to mix the paint and to add a little radium dust and glue into it, and then use it to paint the hands and the dials of the watches. And in order for the mixture to spread better, they were instructed to wet the brushes with their mouths every now and then, which meant that they swallowed small amounts of the glowing paint each time. The locals called them the Radium Girls or the Ghost Girls because the shifts themselves glowed in the dark after the shift was over. And however, it was not a cause for concern for anyone, but a real advantage. Therefore, the young brides, after days spent in the factory and in the evenings, went dancing to literally shine on packages and dancing parties. And that's thanks to the work with the watches that they could afford the best dresses, expensive shoes and perfumes, and to stand out even more, the girls used radium on their lips, cheeks, and even put it on their teeth. The companies saw it as a great potential and based their own research on it and even argued that it had even healing properties. It had been claimed that radium will help with hay fever, constipation, and even rejuvenate, and it was assigned to women wishing to get pregnant, and doctors recommended drinking water with particles of the element to enjoy good immunity. Cosmetics with radium were produced and it was added to inter alia for drugs, toothpaste, cigarettes, and chocolate. Newspapers reported that the council would give people years of life, and that the council companies built a lucrative business around it. And thus, when the discovery of Sklodowska became a very real vein of gold, all warnings that the radium could also be harmful were completely ignored, and hardly anyone said that a Polish researcher while conducting research on it suffered radiation burns, and in the laboratories, lead aprons were worn to protect against the element, and it was argued that in small amounts radium could not do any harm, and besides, no one had died because of it, unfortunately, by that time. Let's go back to the history of the Rad Girls from New Jersey. During the war, they were adored by everyone, and the demand for the watches continued to increase, and soldiers sent thanks from the front for their patriotic attitude and for the work for the American Army. However, when the war was over, the fame slowly died down, but the first reports of illnesses among factory workers was also appearing, and the girls reported to the doctors because their teeth were moving and falling out for unknown reasons. Purulent lesions formed in their mouths, and the infected spread of other parts of their body, literally breaking them down from the inside. The medics wrung their heads as they could not find the cause, and the situation became even more dramatic with the first deaths. And people in the streets began to talk about the tragic fate of the watch factory workers, and the Department of Labor committees scrutinized these cases more closely. However, no one associated with mystery deaths with radium. After all, it was widely believed that it was a healing property, and thus when the workers left this world one by one, the management of the watch company denied the allegations of the families of the deceased, arguing that the council could not kill. And in the end, the U.S. Public Health Service decided to prepare a report on the work with the U.S. Council and the experts after collecting data, and recommended that anyone who came into contact with it should go for a detailed study. However, no other steps were taken to solve the deaths, so the plants were not going to stop working at all. Only the discovery of a certain Harrison Martland was able to harm them, and the doctor developed tests which allowed them to detect radium poisoning, and his research also described what was happening to the body as a result of prolonged contact with the element, and he spoke about radiation sickness and death as a result of it. The radium industry tried to desecrate his work, but this did not stop the first lawsuits filed by the families of the deceased council girls. The fight with a large corporation was not easy, however. Lawyers refused to handle such cases, and radium poisoning was not a compensable disease. And the New Jersey firm additionally conducted media propaganda arguing that if working conditions as its factories were endangered to its health, it would immediately suspend operations. Nevertheless, the mother of one of the deceased managed to find a law firm that wanted to prove the truth, and the court battle began, which caused shock throughout America, and the awarded damages, amounting to millions of dollars today, motivated more people to fight. And even on their deathbeds, women testified about the terrible consequences of contact with the element, and about huge cancerous tumors appearing on their bodies, sarcomas, and pieces of the jaw that literally detaching from the gums. And the press reported that these incidents in the headlines, and the radium company did everything to silence the scandal. In the end, women managed to find justice, and not only for themselves, but also for workers across America, and the cases of the girls were among the first which an employer was held responsible for the health of his employees, and it also held the change in the provisions of the labor code and the establishment of Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which still operates to protect employees. And as a result of radial trials, safety standards as industrial plants have been significantly improved, but the girls themselves are now rarely mentioned in history books. And how is that even possible? Well, their lawsuits were in the 1930s, and they were forgotten when the World War II came, so the Great Depression hit, and since then the watch company was one of the few still working, giving jobs, and no one dared to fight against it anymore. And the lawsuits died down, the demand for luminescent timepieces in connection with the war increased significantly, and most people slowly forgot about how the whole radium scandal thing got to going. And the people fighting the persons contributed to the introduction of the safeguards in plants processing the element, but there was no question of its withdrawal from its common use. The discovery of Sklodowska fueled lucrative multi-million-dollar businesses, and new companies using its properties emerged over time, like mushrooms after rain. And rads were still used in shields, although brushes were forbidden to be licked, and workers were provided with protective equipment. No further injuries were detected in the shield painters, and proving that the radio maiden's harm could have been avoided. And in the 1960s, the use of radium paint was discontinued finally. Nobody's able to count exactly how many victims of the radium poisoning there was, but it's only assumed that the last of them died in 1983. Did you know that the radioactive element was once added to cosmetics? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and check us out tomorrow as we'll have another episode with the wow effect. Until next time.